it's just a numbers game. If you're consistently out there all day rowing in a beam sea with breaking waves, eventually one of them's going to get you.
Right.
But they'd be breaking just in front of you, just behind you, just before they get to you, or just after you go past them. And in all of those cases, most of those cases, fine, wasn't a problem. It's when they all align and it breaks literally as you are just sitting on top of it, basically, or just before you get to it.
Yeah.
And then it breaks on top of the boat and pushes you over. Because the salt's hygroscopic, so as soon as you get anything that's got salt on it, I mean, you can see salt crystals on the boat during the day. The sun would dry them out, and there'd just be a dry salt crystal. And then as soon as the sun disappeared, it would be a water droplet, because the salt just sucks up the water in the atmosphere, and it's a water droplet. And that's exactly what was happening on my clothing and towels and stuff down below.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Strength Institute podcast. Today we have a follow-up podcast with now world record holder Rob Barton, who just completed the very first solo, unassisted rowing voyage from mainland Australia all the way to mainland Africa in just 86 days. So everyone is very excited to see how it went, to hear some perspective from you. And thank you for coming back onto the podcast.
No, you're very welcome, Nevin. Thanks for inviting me. It's great.
My pleasure. Now, I've got a lot of questions to start with. And actually, I think it's actually even more important to say, all right, so 86 days to get from mainland Australia to mainland Africa.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
You were estimating anywhere between 3 and 6 months.
I was, yeah.
And you did it in just sub 3 months.
I know. I was completely... Well, I was really surprised by the timing. We did a lot of work before we left with University of Western Australia. So UWA developed this data model for us. They did a whole load of analysis of hindcast data looking back over the last 20 years.
Yep.
And based on that data, they worked out the best point to leave from, and also then the best route to take. And every day we would put in I had Neil on shore, who was acting as my shore manager.
You just go a little closer to the... Yeah, perfect.
Yeah, so every day Neil would be plugging in the actual position that I was at. That would then go into this data model where they'd look at the weather forecast as it was going to be for the next 10 days, 2 weeks. They'd look at the hindcast data as it had been over the last 20 years. And off the back of that, they'd say, this is where we think you should go. So I got to Africa. I got to Madagascar. Their model only worked to Madagascar. So I got to Madagascar in just over 2 months.
Yeah.
And that was, and then after that, we were kind of on our own.
Right.
But to get to Madagascar in that time was pretty incredible. Previous crossings, there'd been 7 solo crossings previously. And the only one that was faster than that left in November. And we couldn't leave in November because that would have meant that we'd be arriving at cyclone season in Africa. So, weather conditions to leave in November would probably be good if we were only going to go to Madagascar or to Reunion Island or somewhere. We'd have, cracking following winds, and we'd be able to do it. Yeah, it would have been very, very fast.
Well, and just a quick, important to remind everyone that was listening just now is that the 7 solo crossings have only been to islands of Africa. So
That's
Reunion
right.
Island, Mauritius, Madagascar, but none to mainland. You're the first to go mainland to mainland.
First to go mainland to mainland non-stop. There was one guy
Non-stop,
who
okay.
stopped in Madagascar for 3 months.
But that's cheating.
That's
Yeah, that doesn't count. That clearly doesn't count. And in 86 days, now I kind of felt almost a little gypped. I was expecting this journey to go for longer.
Yeah.
Did you think about just doing a lap around Madagascar before getting to the mainland, just to make it worth your while?
No, I have to say I was actually really pleased that it only took 86 days. So yeah, look, I mean, in the first couple of weeks when I was going so well, I was kind of thinking, enjoy it while it lasts, because my expectation was, I've read, Sarah Ooten was the person whose book I read when she went to Mauritius, and I think she did it in, it was 120 or 130 days or something. And I always remember her getting stuck in this weather system that took her around in a great big circle in the middle of the ocean. Oh. And she was, literally stuck there for over a month.
Wow.
So, that was my expectation. So whilst I had a really good start, I kept thinking, it's not going to stay like this.
Well, no, I think it's a good little comparison there. there was another team of rowers that set out at a similar time, and there was 4 of them, and they went from Australia to Mauritius, and it took them 70 days to get to Mauritius.
Yeah.
And if I'm correct, because I followed along on the Rob's Row Facebook page, you passed Mauritius at around day 62.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So again, you seem very gracious and humble in having done this, but would you like to talk any smack to this team of 4 that took 8 days longer than you, even though there was 4 of them rowing, and you did it, just like a full week faster than them by yourself?
Yeah, so look, I mean, they didn't leave I left from Carnarvon, so I had the benefit of the analysis from UWA. They left from Geraldton, so I knew that to leave from Geraldton based on the UWA analysis, that I think it would have taken an extra, I can't remember if they said 20 or 30% longer, but it would have been a lot longer. So that's the first thing where they left from. And when they left, I think they then ended up getting caught in the Lewin Current, and they didn't have favourable winds. So, I was lucky. The day I didn't leave on the day I wanted to. I waited until there was favourable winds. And then when I left, I had following winds pretty much straight away. So I was, I just was lucky with the weather.
Yeah.
And they were very unlucky with the weather. They spent days on sea anchor, both at the start and also towards the finish. They had quite a bit of time on sea anchor as well.
Right. See, you're too kind, Rob. I was hoping that you would be like, they need to pick their game up a little bit.
Oh, well, that goes without saying.
That does go without saying. It does go without saying. You've sent some photos and videos through, and I've just got a little bit of a slideshow, and so I wanted to just play through a few of those. If I just quickly change this one over here. This is your daughter?
It is, yeah.
This is Jess? Yep.
Yeah, this is Jess.
And this is sort of one of the main reasons. For people that haven't watched the first podcast, I'll link it up in the corner. But this was to raise awareness and funds for a charity called Zero to Hero, which is trying to prevent youth suicide as well.
That's right.
And so this is a really worthy cause. And can you talk a little bit about how that all started for people that haven't listened to the first podcast?
Yeah, sure. I mean, look, and first of all, I didn't drag Jess into this unwillingly.
Of course, yeah.
I think she's been incredibly courageous in allowing her story to be shared, because it's quite a personal thing. But she wants to help as well and do what she can to help prevent other people going through what she went through. But two and a half years ago, I came home to find that Jess had attempted to take her own life. She'd taken an overdose. And on the outside, Jess is the happiest. Well, look at the picture. I mean, she is the happiest, smiliest person you can meet. You'd ask her how she was. It was always good. It was always positive. And maybe I just didn't drill down deep enough, I guess. I didn't push hard enough, but there was clearly things going on inside that she was struggling with, and I didn't know, but she was suffering from depression and anxiety, Anyway, look, we're 2 years on now. She's actually in the US at the moment. She's in Hawaii, having a fab time doing Camp America.
Fantastic.
So she's in a much better place, but it's been hard work for her. She's been through. She's spent a couple of weeks in Bentley Adolescent Unit, and she's been in working with a psychologist for the last couple of years. So she's come a long way since then, and it's an ongoing journey. It's not something that you can fix overnight. It's in many ways people look at someone with a broken arm or something. You can see what it is, you can see it get fixed, and you can see them getting better. With mental health, you just don't. And it is a journey, and she's doing great at the moment.
Yeah, that's fantastic to hear. And is the link to the My Cause still up and running?
It is.
The fundraiser?
Yes.
Perfect. Well, I'll link that into the description of all these videos as well. So if you are watching or listening, it's still time to donate there. How much have you raised so far?
So at the moment, we're up to $110,000.
That's fantastic.
There's another 10 in the pipeline that I know is coming in, so that will get us to 120. And we've got a target of 300, so we've got a bit of way to go.
Yeah, but still, 110 is a fantastic number to be at.
It is.
Yeah,
it is. Yeah, really pleased.
Really great. Yep. All right, so those links will be in the description there. But if I click through onto the next slide there, this was just prior to taking off, was it?
Yeah, that's right. I think that was the Saturday or Sunday, and I departed on the Wednesday. Wednesday.
Switch this across to here so you can see. All right, so just a few days before taking off there, and
Big tummy there.
I was about to say, looking a little thicker around the midsection. Nothing wrong with that, Rob. Now, when you first came in, it was about 6 or 7 months, I think, before you ended up pushing off offshore. And you were only in the mid to high 70 kilo range.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
when we were talking about it, so how much weight do people lose on these cross ocean voyages? And really depending on the length of time, it was like that 15 to 20 kilo range. So we're like, well, let's get you up to 100 kilos, right? That was the goal. And I think you pushed off just sub 100, about, high 90s?
98 was where I peaked. I actually dropped to about 96 by the time I left.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just hard to maintain all those calories up in Carnarvon there?
Hard to, well, it was just hard to maintain generally. And then there's, the stress of sort of the last week or so running around too much doing the last final things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So 96 you pushed off at. What did you weigh when you landed in Africa almost 3 months later?
I was down to 80.
Down to 80.
Yeah.
Okay, so you lost 16 kilos.
Yep.
So only a handful of kilos above the starting weight then.
Yeah. Well, that's right. Yeah, because before I started training, I was pretty much sticking at 75-ish.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I've pretty much lost it all.
Which is great, because if you were floating around in some circular, current in the middle of the ocean for another month, you would have definitely needed those extra few kilos of stored energy.
I would indeed. Yeah. No. So it was a good thing putting it all on.
Yeah. No, fantastic. But are you feeling a bit happier now, being a bit more svelte?
Yeah. Definitely. I was not comfortable at that weight. It was just too much.
Right, but it was just a means to an end.
Yeah,
in the
that's
end,
right. Yeah.
Which is what a lot of people that need to realize when it comes to doing, athletic feats, or whether it's an endurance or strength, you need to eat for performance and for what the task at hand is going to be. So for you, that was putting on a heap of weight. And with that, it wasn't all fat mass. There was still a lot of lean mass that went on too, because you were training weights, and all those numbers were increasing really nicely before you left.
Yeah.
But that was really good to see. And we can just say that the UWA help was minor, but really it's all those strength gains in the gym here that really helped you, power through the high seas.
That was it. I'm sure that made the difference.
100%.
Yeah.
Perfect. All right, let me just flip back to I think the first video is of your cabin. And I have the...
yes.
Yeah, I have the volume off just because the microphones wouldn't pick it up anyway. But this is where you slept.
It is, yeah. So that little bit on the right, that white... Sorry, the blue sheet and the black pillow, yep.
Yeah. And can you tell us a little bit about sort of the living conditions on the boat?
Yeah, look, the bit swinging around in the middle, that was the a sweatshirt that I took with me by mistake, and that was actually the best thing I took.
Really?
Yeah.
Why is that?
It hung there in the middle of the cabin the entire journey, but it just acted as a ceiling fan, because I had to have the hatch shut the entire time I was down below, but it was like a sweat box in there. It just cooked.
Yeah.
And having that sweatshirt swinging around from side to side with the movement of the boat just gave me that little bit of breeze over my head and torso that I needed just to sort of stay a little bit cool.
Yeah. And reading, because and again, if you want to get more sort of updates about this journey, you can go to the Rob's Row Facebook page, which is still up there. And Rob was giving quite regular updates on
daily
updates on this journey. And so it was kind of interesting seeing the things that you were having to deal with or figuring out sort of while you were out at sea. So one being the cabin door would either lock completely closed, but it was like a sweat box for you, or you could risk it and have it locked in a slightly open position, but when big waves would come overboard, it would wet your entire sleeping area.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So that, look, I mean, that towel that I slept on was always felt wet. And it, because the salt's hydroscopic, so as soon as you get anything that's got salt on it, I mean, you can see salt crystals on the boat during the day. The sun would dry them out, and there'd just be a dry salt crystal. And then as soon as the sun disappeared, it would be a water droplet, because the salt just sucks up the water in the atmosphere, and it's a water drop. And that's exactly what was happening on my clothing and towels and stuff down below and bedding.
So everything was just damp all the time.
It's as soon as it was dusk, it just sucked up the water in the atmosphere and was wet.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, it's horrible.
Yeah. And then this video, I believe you're talking about sort of the what you had to do every morning. You push all your stuff to the side.
Yeah, that's right. So, well, my feet would normally be down to the left of that yellow bag. So that's my feet went down there. And then I would try and sort of fill in those gaps. Well, in rough weather, I'd fill in those gaps with extra extra packing and storage.
Yeah.
It's because when I capsized, that everything would slide down to that corner.
Right.
But yeah, there's the bed folded up and put away.
Yeah.
So that when I get in and out, I'm not stepping on my bed with wet feet.
Yeah.
And give the towel a chance to dry. Yeah.
Yeah. As best it could.
Yep.
Yeah. And so this next video I thought was really interesting because before we left, I think we talked about it in the first podcast, how you at seasickness, being out at sea, because you're experienced sailor yourself, spent a lot of time on the ocean, and it wasn't something that you were too concerned about because you have quite a bit of experience sort of being out at sea there. Let's flip this one over here. But you were surprised. You actually got quite seasick for quite a while at the start.
Yeah, I was just looking back through some notes yesterday. I was seasick for up till about day 20.
Yeah.
Which really surprised me because, as you say, I've done lots of ocean sailing and stuff and not been seasick. So, yeah, it did come as a surprise. But the motion on a rowing boat is totally different to that on a sailing boat.
Yeah.
So on a sailing boat, you've got that pitching where you're going forward and you're going through the waves and just up and down, forward and back, basically. With a rowing boat, you have that same motion, but you add to it this sideways rocking, because on a sailing boat you've got the sails full of the wind, and that pressure on the boat keeps it leaning over at a steady angle. But on a rowing boat, you don't have that. So every time there's a wave that breaks or swell coming from a different direction, you get the boat rocking sideways as well as pitching up and down, forward and back.
Yeah. Well, I think this video really captures that a lot as well. You can just see how much movement. You said this is what you're seeing every morning when you come out of your cabin. Just the amount of movement there. And was this like a sort of standard sort of swell size for you during your journey? Was it usually calmer than this, or like what would you do? How would you describe that?
That looks quite calm, actually.
That looks quite calm. I mean, just looking at that sort of tipping and rocking back and forth, I can see the people that wouldn't have that sort of experience at sea would really struggle to sort of get their sea legs about them.
It was pretty uncomfortable. I mean, you got used to that. I mean, after that sort of day 20, I did. Yeah, you just didn't really notice it. You just get on with it. But the reason I say it was quite calm is the water is dead fish.
Yeah, we're going to talk about these little flying fish as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. So there were days I'd come up and there'd be literally 100 of them. You'd lose count counting them.
Wow.
And they just get everywhere.
And I think the main question, did you snack on any of them? Did you try them?
No, I did not.
You didn't?
No. My dad was quite disappointed because I was in communication with him a fair bit doing this crossing. Yeah. And because he sailed across the Indian Ocean years ago. Yeah. And he said I should be collecting them all up and frying them.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is clearly a hint from nature there saying, make sure you're getting your nutrition in. Yeah,
it would have been a bit of extra protein, I guess, but no, it really did not appeal. And I didn't have anything, I didn't have a frying. I had a jet boil, but no frying pan or oil or anything to cook them in. Right. So that was my excuse.
Well, I mean, you had seawater. You could have just pickled them. Huh?
I could.
Yeah. It's not fresh fish and brine. So seasick took you 20 days to get sort of used to, and you ended up having to take some tablets to help with that?
Yeah, I did. Yeah. So initially I had some prescription meds that my doctor gave me, which just killed the nausea because I couldn't keep anything down.
Yeah, and that's what was worrying when you were describing it, because you were planning on eating sort of upwards of 5,000 calories a day, and if you can't keep anything down, you can't eat that many calories.
No, that's right.
And so we're like, well, I hope that he can sort of get over the seasickness so that he can get the calories in, so he doesn't waste away in the first half of the journey there. Yep. Also, you were not a fan of a lot of those pre-made meals ready to eat.
I wasn't at the beginning. You're absolutely right. Yeah. And the reason for that, I'm sure, is because I was trying to eat them whilst I was sick. So, if you've ever thrown anything up, it immediately puts you off that it just, I don't know, it just tastes horrible. And it takes a long time, I think, to get over something that you've thrown. It's like people who go and drink, isn't it? It's like, oh, I'm never going to drink again.
Yeah.
And they might, but possibly not the same thing that came up the night before. And it was like that with food. I just found the taste of anything that had previously been thrown up, I just really struggled to eat. but I got over it over time. And towards the end, all I could think about after one meal was what I was going to have next. And I was positively looking forward to the food as it came.
Yeah, right. So once you got over that initial bout of seasickness there and the food started to taste a little better, were you able to get the 5,000 calories in per day, or were you still at less than that?
Yeah, less than that. So the most I ever got to was about 4,000 a day.
Okay.
Yeah. So I did struggle to get the food down.
Right. Yeah. I think that's interesting. What did you do with all the leftover food? Because you took 6 months of rations with you.
I did, yeah. So there are over 400 odd meals still on the boat, and I've sold them with the boat. Looks like the boat's sold. Hopefully, I'll get confirmation of that later today. But yeah, it looks like it's sold.
Fantastic. Yeah, I think when we did the last podcast, you weren't sure whether you were going to try to do a different crossing somewhere else, or if this is going to be a one and done type of deal. So you have sold the boat. You shipped it over back to the UK after.
It's still in Tanzania.
Oh, still in Tanzania.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. Yep. So it looks like it's been sold in Tanzania. So the new owner will take on shipping of it. He's going to take it to Namibia and row to Brazil.
Oh, wow.
So another ocean to go. Yeah.
Well, that's great. So no wastage there. That food got included with the boat.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yep.
All right. So moving on to the next video that I have here. This is you catching some runners, is what you described it as on your Facebook page. So catching runners. So this is when the swell sort of lines up in the correct direction that you're traveling, and you can just get a couple big rows in and just sort of catch those waves.
That's right. Yeah, you just give an extra big push just as you're sort of at the top of the wave and surf down it, and it just gives you an extra.
This part looks really quite fun.
Oh, it was fantastic.
Yeah.
It was like
and how long would these stretches go for when everything was lining up for you?
Look, to get the waves that size, and these are quite modest waves, so to get them consistently at that kind of size didn't happen very often. There were plenty of occasions where they were a lot bigger, but mostly they were on what we call in a beam sea, so on your side.
Yeah.
And when they're hitting you at the side, then it's not quite so good because that's when you're in danger of capsize.
Right.
But when it was like that, it was cracking.
Yeah.
It's really good.
And that did. You mentioned in your post that you found that the easiest way to row was just in the nude.
Yeah, that's right. So I'm sitting there on a sheepskin.
Yeah.
And the issue with wearing clothing is that you get salt sores. So by being naked and sitting on sheepskin, the sheepskin wicks away the salt, you get minimal salt sores, minimal problems sitting on your bum all day.
Yeah, and you did do a couple little interviews while you're on your way across with the news, and you got Don was as the Naked Rower, as the new nickname.
That's right. Yeah,
that's a good name, eh? Rob the Naked Rower.
Yeah, they're trying to transfer that down to the surf club, and they're calling me Starkers, but hasn't stuck yet.
Hasn't stuck yet.
Yeah,
it's only a matter of time, Rob. It's only a matter of time. Now you've talked about sort of capsizing, and it did happen a couple times when you were out there.
Had three capsizes.
Three capsizes. So the whole boat's tipped over, or it's just flung you out of the boat?
So the two occasions I was on deck and the boat went upside down, so 180 degrees, and then it came back the same way. So it wasn't a 360 roll, but it was upside down because I can, sitting in the water looking up at it, it was definitely upside down. And then it sort of slowly came back the right way. And
these boats are meant to self-right?
They are, that's right. So they've got a big, they've got, the fore cabin is raised over height so that when it's sitting in the water, it's just not stable the wrong way up, and it pushes it around the right way again. Yeah,
wow. And so that was just sort of like a rogue wave that would send it over, or how did that happen?
It was more a case of timing. So when you're rowing in a beam sea, all of the waves, you can see the waves, but breaking, in the distance, close to you, and most of them, you only have to go down to the ocean and look out at the ocean, and you'll see breaking waves on a rough day. But they don't all break at the same time. So a lot of it comes down it's just a numbers game. If you're consistently out there all day rowing in a beam sea with breaking waves, eventually one of them's going to get you.
Right.
But they'd be breaking just in front of you, just behind you, just before they get to you, or just after you go past them, and in all of those cases, most of those cases, fine, wasn't a problem. It's when they all align and it breaks literally as you are just sitting on top of it, basically, or just before you get to it.
Yeah.
And then it breaks on top of the boat and pushes you over. It doesn't always capsize you. Well, mostly it doesn't. Mostly it'll break onto the boat and just water everywhere and go sideways a bit.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's just a matter of timing. But and there is a way to avoid it. If it was really, really huge and that you were in danger of, I don't know, if the frequency of the capsizes was going to be increased and every wave was breaking, then you put out a sea anchor, which puts the nose of the boat into the bad weather. And
that's basically a sort of a giant underwater parachute.
That's right. Yeah, exactly that. And that will stop you from capsizing, but it then means that you're not going in the right direction.
Right.
So you've always got that sort of quandary to weigh up: is do I take the risk and hope I don't capsize too much?
Yeah.
Or go the wrong way.
And so 2 times that happened, you were rowing on deck, and then 1 time you were in your cabin?
I was, yeah.
Day or night?
Night. I was fast asleep. Yeah.
Fast asleep. Yeah. So what's that like, getting tossed upside down in the middle of the night, pitch black?
Yeah, that is a little disconcerting, I have to say.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you end up with everything then on top of you, because where my feet go, at that sort of bottom end of the boat, there's toolboxes and storage and food and so all sorts of things stowed there, and they all end up on top of you, sort of wedged in a bit, and then you have to wiggle and move them all back again.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
That's definitely be a bit concerning to be waking up completely disoriented, upside down, everything on top of you.
Yeah, it is, and but I suppose you get some preparation for that, because capsize is the worst. But there are lots of occasions where you only go 90 degrees over and everything ends up kind of on top of you anyway. So you get, I suppose you get some training for it, if you like, before the worst of them happens. So
yeah, right.
So it's not a complete surprise.
And when you're in the cabin, and that cabin's locked, so you're not at risk of falling out. But when you're on the deck of the rowing boat, you were attached to the boat in some regard, in case something like this happened.
I was, yeah. In fact, that picture you had of the deck earlier, you could see the leg leash sitting there. Yeah, so that one there, that's my leg leash sitting there in the middle. That strap sitting on top of the seat.
Okay, so you would just constantly just have it attached to your leg?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like a leg leash that you'd wear for a surfboard, but just a slightly heavier duty, the Vycobi one.
Yeah.
But with a much stronger webbing strap to it as well, and then that would go back to a throwing line that was attached to the boat. So there's about 10 meters of line on it. So the idea was that if I did get chucked out, I'd be clear of the boat. I'd be able to swim back and it wouldn't roll on top of me.
Right.
And then I'd wait for things to settle down and swim back and climb, or pull myself back on the rope and climb on.
And we'll look at it in the, it's a good chance to go across. We're going to go to when you had to actually clean the bottom of the boat sometimes. So you had to actually jump off the boat, and in case like this, you were attached to it, and then you also had the trailing line behind the boat. I
had the trailing line behind the first couple of times I did it, and then I figured I didn't bother.
Rob,
yes, I just.
It's being a bit risky there.
Well, I had the leg leash on, so I had confidence in my leg leash.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so, what was it like jumping off? Because I think when I googled it before, the deepest part of the Indian Ocean was about 7 kilometers deep. Do you know how deep sort of you were at the deepest part?
Well, the first time I jumped in on. I'm trying to remember the name of the ridge, but it was only 2 kilometers deep.
Only 2 kilometers deep.
But and then on the other occasions, I think it was up at between 3 and 5.
Wow.
So yeah, it's a deep ocean for sure.
When you look down, just blackness? Darkness?
Absolutely, yeah, can't see a thing.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, and there was one time when I did go for a swim where it was. That was off Ile Raphael, and I think it was only supposed to be 25 meters, and I couldn't see the bottom there either.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah, wow.
Just all stirred up a bit. I was surprised. But
yeah. What did you, and so this is people that are watching, this is the leash rope, and then the one to the right is the trailing rope?
That's right, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so that trailing rope, you said you didn't leave it out for the most part. It was only when you're going off to clean?
I only put it out on a couple of occasions when I cleaned. Yeah, it was, otherwise it was tied up to the boat. And the last couple of times I cleaned, I didn't put it out at all.
Yeah,
just relied on the leg leash.
Fair enough. Yep. So once you cleaned the bottom, scrubbed the little barnacles, and that's what it was, little barnacles attaching to the bottom of the boat?
They were actually quite big. I don't know what they were. They're some kind of shellfish or other, but they were about 25, 30 mil long.
Oh, wow.
So I don't know whether they can't have grown that big. They must be sort of swimming in the water and then just find the boat and attach themselves to it, because I can't imagine they'd grow that quickly.
Okay, so you scrape those off, help with the the steering and the smooth rowing. But then, how did you get back onto the boat?
So that was so when I was swimming, then I sort of had that lined up and planned. So I had a line that was over the side that had a little footstep in it, so I could use that to lever myself back up. But the boat's only about I don't know, 18 inches. What's that in millimeter? 45 centimeters of freeboard. So it's just a case of get your arms over, big kick, wait for the boat to rock in the right direction, and pull yourself back on board.
Yeah, fantastic.
But it's harder to do that when you get thrown in, because it's not so planned, and also I was naturally out of breath, I guess, from the sort of the adrenaline kick.
Oh yeah,
and then you just have to get yourself half on board, relax, take a big breath, and then so it might take a little bit longer, but you just you hang on.
Yeah, 100%. You crossed a few shipping channels as you went as well. Yeah. But there was big stretches where you saw no signs of human life out there, right?
That's right, yeah. In fact, it was, I saw a ship, I think, on day 1 or 2 that picked up on, so I had something called AIS, which is an automatic I can't remember what it stands for. But anyway, I had a transponder on my boat which transmits my position to all other ships, and ships are obliged to have AIS, so they transmit their position as well. And so I had an alarm set on my system that meant that if anyone was on a collision course with me or going to come within a certain distance, then my alarm would go off and I'd see them. And that went off on day, I can't remember if it was first or second night, and then nothing for months. Well, certainly weeks. I didn't see anything until I was halfway across. I think I saw something, and then as I got closer to Mauritius, there's a very busy shipping lane that runs from the south of Africa up to the Straits of Malacca, up sort of Singapore, Malaysia. I think it's the busiest shipping lane in the world.
Wow.
But even then, I didn't see a lot of the ships. I saw quite a few on my electronic systems, but to physically see them, I'm so low on the water. The horizon for me is only about 6 to 7 miles away. And so these ships were coming up on my system as being sort of 7, 8, 9 miles away, and I couldn't see them.
Yeah, right.
So yeah, but it was, there's lots of them.
Yeah. And some unfortunate observations that you said you did see a lot of trash out there, a lot of waste and rubbish.
Yeah, particularly in the shipping lanes. And I think one of the issues we've got with ships is when they get to port, they have to pay to dump their rubbish. Well, when they're out at sea, they just chuck it over the side and then they haven't got to pay. So, I think at a global level, something needs to be done there so that ports don't charge for collecting rubbish, or they include it in the port fees or something, and give them some kind of an incentive to bring it back, because it's, already there are laws in place that say that they're not supposed to chuck it over the side, but clearly they're not being adhered to. Yeah. Great shame.
Was it quite prevalent? I mean, you saw a fair bit of trash floating around?
A lot. It was, if you think that from my rowing position, I can only see 5 to 10 meters either side of the boat when I'm sitting down. If I stand up, obviously I can see further, but I was fairly going through those shipping lanes. I was seeing trash, I don't know, every few minutes. And if you sort of extrapolate that and say, well, if that's what you're seeing in a 20-meter wide stretch of water, what is it in 100 meters and then in 10 miles? And
it's probably a fair bit of trash out there.
There's a lot,
unfortunately.
Yeah.
And for those listening, you actually carried all of your waste on board. You had some compartments that that you stored that all in, and then disposed of correctly on the African side. So
I did.
Your journey was a waste-free journey.
It was. I do confess to losing a couple of water bottles over the side when I capsized, but basically all of my rubbish came back with me.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. So that was, minimal human apart from some trash going through those shipping lanes and a few ships. What about wildlife? Because I know that you posted that you were surprised at the lack of wildlife that you saw out there. And we weren't sure, because I know the Indian Ocean can be very rich in wildlife if you're going to be seeing whales breaching and whatnot. What was your experience with that?
Yeah, it's quite funny. The first or second day I got back here, I went for a row down at Mullaloo Beach and saw 4 dolphins, which was more dolphins than I saw on the entire crossing of 3 months. So yeah, I didn't see any dolphins, no whales. I saw 3 sharks. I saw some fish jumping, some quite big fish, and I saw a few birds. So storm petrels and shearwaters and albatross.
How close were the sharks? Were they coming up just to investigate the boat?
Yeah, I think so. So they were, very close.
Could you tell what kind?
I think one of them had the colourings of a leopard shark, if there is such a thing. It was, that kind of yellowish colour. The other 2, I've no idea.
Right.
Yeah.
Was that in the back of your mind when you were jumping overboard to clean the boat?
It's quite funny, actually. Before I left, I was sort of, people were saying, what are you going to get in? And I was sort of, full of bravado and, oh yes, I'll be over the side every 3 or 5 days, give it a scrub, no trouble. But when it came to it, it was, standing on the edge for that first time before jumping in, it was quite an uncomfortable feeling. Yeah. So I wasn't quite so keen when it came to it.
Yeah.
But you kind of get in and it's funny, actually, once you've been in for 5 minutes, because cleaning the boat, it was about an hour's job.
Wow.
So and obviously it's in the back of your mind. You're forever looking over your shoulder when you first get in, and then you get stuck into the job and forget about it and just get on with it. But yeah, it's definitely there at the back.
I think that would be a very uncomfortable feeling for a lot of people.
Yeah, you could get the old Jaws music playing in the back of your head, don't you?
Yeah, lovely. Yeah. So what else did you sort of discover? Because you found out quite early on there were some things that weren't quite watertight, and you had to do some fixes on the go later on in the journey with your wheels. The coasters on the slides were starting to break down, so you're able to salvage some off of the spare seat. What sort of things did you have to deal with during this process? Because 3 months at sea, things are going to potentially break down, and some things did, and you didn't have the boat for a super long time before you left, so there was minimal sort of time to see what was going to be what were potential issues. So what sort of issues did you actually end up encountering?
My number one concern before I left was around my water maker. So I say water maker, it's a desalination unit. So it takes the salt out, pumps the water through a very fine membrane. Salt goes one way, salt water goes one way, and fresh water the other. And that's so I actually took that out of the boat and had it in the garage on a workbench. And Neil, my shore-based ops manager, and I, we played with it, if you like. We simulated scenarios with where it could go wrong. We forced airlocks into it, and then then primed the system, and so we played with that a bit, and that was time that was really well spent, because every time I needed to use it, say every nine times out of 10, it needed priming, and there's a bit of a process to doing that correctly. So having done that practice before I left was a good call.
Yeah, great.
And I had spares for that. So I had had a spare high pressure pump and relay, and not only did I have spares for that electrical unit, which is powered by batteries which are charged by solar, but I also had a manual water maker, had I needed to, if I'd lost power.
Yeah.
So from a water point of view, well prepared, and I'm pleased to say that worked beyond having to prime it. There was no other issues with it. But as you say, other issues I had, I had a leak in the boat, which I discovered on day 2, and that was basically from a bit of electrical equipment that I had fitted just before leaving, and the conduit that was used on it was not the right conduit, basically, and it was just letting water through from the wet side of the boat into what should have been the dry side of the boat. So I ended up with water in that sleeping compartment that we were looking at earlier. There's a couple of inches of water in that, which I didn't notice because I was rowing. Came down below, everything wet. And that was really disconcerting.
And that's quite early on.
That was day 2, I think. Was day 2 or 3. Yeah. And in fact, at that point, I actually turned around and came back. I I was really seasick. I hadn't eaten for 2 or 3 days. I say 2 or 3 because I can't actually remember when it was, and I didn't write this up until day 5 or 6 or something, and the days had blurred a bit. But I think it was day 2 or 3, and I called Neil, my shore manager, and said, "Look, I've had enough. I'm coming back. Boat's leaking. Boat's not. I was blaming the boat. The boat was fixable. In the end, I did fix it." But, I started this adventure, if you like, for purely selfish reasons. It was just about me going out and having a good time. And it was whilst I was rowing back, I'd been rowing back for a couple of hours, it sort of dawned on me that actually there were other reasons that I was doing this.
Yes, yeah.
I was doing it for my daughter. I was doing it to raise money for charity. And those reasons were bigger than I. And so off the back of that, I turned around again and carried on. And, and the problems I had, they were issues, but I was able to overcome them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how did you manage to get it watertight again?
So I had some sealant with me. So I took the conduit out and then sealed up the hole. So it was just going onto the bare wires. I say bare wires. They've got rubber sheaths on, but just going directly to the wires without the conduit, and that sealed up that hole. The other areas I had was the aft locker, the aft cabin was leaking through the vents, so I had to seal up the vents as well, and that solved the 99% of the problems. I mean, there was a vent into the cabin that I slept in as well, but I didn't seal that. I closed it, but in fair weather I would keep it open.
Yeah. And you did lose some Mars bars to the to the conditions.
Yeah, tragic. Yeah.
So those little plastic Mars bar wrappers not so watertight as you would think.
No, they're not. No,
yeah.
no. So so I mean, because I'd stored all of my chocolate, and I had like 500 chocolate bars. It was supposed to be like 1.5 per. No, it can't be right. 1.5 chocolate bars a day for 100. There must have been 300 odd chocolate bars anyway.
Yeah.
So it was a lot of chocolate. And a good chunk of it was damaged to the point that I had to throw the chocolate overboard.
Oh no!
I removed the wrappers. You'll be pleased.
Yes, that's right. That's right. Yes, I remember reading that post. You were wondering what fish think of Mars bars.
That's right.
Yeah. Oh, that is funny. And then the rollers, so the wheels on the actual seat started to break down at a certain point as well.
Yeah, that's right. So and it's quite funny actually, because the day I was leaving, one of the guys up at Carnarvon Yacht Club sort of noticed my which are basically skateboard wheels. So heavy duty, decent bearings. And he said, "Oh, I hope you've got some spares." And I said, "Oh, I've got a whole spare seat," which because it's a 2-man boat, so I had a spare seat with a complete set of spares on that. And so I've got a complete spare seat. That'll be fine. But I should have put that spare seat somewhere dry and not left it out on deck.
Yeah.
Because when the primary seat that I was using, when the bearings on that started to break down, I went to get the ones off the spare seat, and because they'd been sat unused in salt water for 7-8 weeks, they were not in a very good state either.
Right.
So
was it just the salt and the corrosion that was sort of getting into the bearings and breaking things down?
Yeah. So on the seat that I was on, I took the bearings out, and the linings of the bearings, it had actually eaten away the linings. So the balls were okay, the little ball bearings, but the bits that they rub on, the actual, the linings bits had broken down and were all rough and very messy. So
by the time you eventually got to Africa, like, how many spares did you have left? Like, how much did you have to cannibalize the other seat?
I fully cannibalized.
Fully cannibalized it. Wow.
Yeah. So I had no. I was at the point where, had it got any worse, I would have to just not have a sliding seat.
Right.
Yep. I would have just been rowing arms and body, no legs.
And that's just one of those things that you would just, common sense would tell you, oh, a whole spare seat is going to be plenty of spare parts, but just that oversight of not keeping it in the cabin away from all the salt. That could really throw a spanner in things if things went for longer. Yeah,
look, if I was doing this again, I would take spare bearings and I would, take at least a spare set for every month probably. So and then I'd change them proactively and not wait for them to break down and make horrible noises.
Okay, so that's in terms of sort of how the boat held up. The boat held up very well. There was some cleaning, a little bit of patchwork at the start, some cannibalizing of the seat. What about you physically? How did you go? Did you get a lot of blisters from the salt water on the hands? You know, you were worried about getting some claw grip, which can be common with open sea crossings. Sort of physically, how did you pull up?
So I was really focused on prevention being better than cure. So every time, the very early days, I had I picked up some sort of chafing sores on my bum, and so I was straight away, lanolin on those, which is, comes from sheep's wool. I was sitting on a sheepskin, so that kind of was common sense to me. And then at night time, I'd put on Sudocrem, which is what you put on babies that stop nappy rash.
Yeah.
So that helped with where I was sitting. My hands, I used one of the rowers at the surf club, Stu. He gave me a top tip. He said use this Fixamal tape line your hands, and then to put on top of the Fixamal some gauze. What's it called? Basically like tape on top of it anyway to keep it in place. And I did that for the first 3 or 4 days. And then after that, I started using gloves and taking the gloves off and doing, an hour or so without gloves. And gradually I weaned myself off gloves to the point where I wasn't using them at all, except for when I was rowing into the wind. When I was rowing into the wind or into seas, there was quite a lot of extra strain on the hands.
Right, just that more pressure that you have to pull against?
Yeah. And when I had that extra pressure, then I'd put the gloves back on. But apart from that, I didn't need them, and I avoided blisters on my hands almost entirely.
That's fantastic.
Yeah,
really good.
But it really was just about doing the right thing and not recognizing if you got to feel that blister coming up, quickly do something before it gets to be a big one.
Yeah.
And tape it up or wear gloves.
Yeah, right. Mentally, all right. So physically good, boat held up well. Mentally, what was it like? Because you had said that you were quite comfortable just being by yourself. You've done a bit of sailing by yourself as well, so you didn't think that was going to be an issue. Did you find that did become an issue at 3 months sort of time being at sea?
Yeah, I was fine being on my own. I think the mental bit was more about it's like I was looking back at my notes the other day, and it was like I was a month into it, and it was congratulations on being a third of the way in, and I'm thinking that means I've got 2/3 to go. It's like, that was quite depressing, realizing that it should have been a celebration, but it really wasn't. And the same when I got to the halfway mark, it's like, oh, okay, the next half is going to be tougher. I knew it was going to be tough going the last bit from Madagascar onwards. So it's like, okay, well, I've done the easy half. I've got the hard half to get. So it's quite negative in that way. But I think those experiences were quite short-lived. I did get over it. I was able to sort of pull myself out of that and just not think about it.
Yeah.
Just don't dwell on it. It's just another day.
Did you find it easier or harder the closer you were getting? I was really interested in your mindset there, whether you would be like, all right, I've passed Madagascar now, I'm on the home stretch. Like, was that a energy boost for you? Or was it like, oh, I'm so close, but I'm still maybe 3 weeks away, a month away, whatever it's going to be? Like, how did you find that?
I really tried hard not to focus on an end date, because I knew that if I did, I would just, it's nothing worse than missing it. So for me, I was very much a case of taking one each day as it came, and just not worrying about it. It got a little bit, I suppose, towards the end once, because again, Neil, my shore manager, he booked flights, went to Dar es Salaam to meet me. I missed Dar es Salaam. Then he went to Tanga.
So just before we continue, was that just purely where the conditions, it was too hard to sort of get the correct boat path into the original port that you had planned?
Yeah, that's right. So there's really strong currents that run up through the Mozambique Channel and go north up to they go all the way up to Somalia. So and the current splits. So the current that and you can see where these currents are from infrared cameras in the sky, or satellite or whatever it is. But anyway, so we were Neil was looking at these and telling me, you need to get further west or you're going to end up in that northern current and you're going to be in Somalia, which is not where I wanted to go.
No.
Yes, so Neil was saying that he could see where these currents were on the satellite images that he was looking at, and if I wasn't careful, I was going to end up in the northbound current, not the northwest.
Right.
I did manage to get into the northwest current, but the forecast was consistently telling us that we were going to be getting southeasterlies, and we were consistently getting southwesters.
Right.
So I was being blown in the wrong direction with a current that was pushing me in the wrong direction, and that was. Yeah, that did get to me a little bit, but you have to be a bit pragmatic with these things. There's nothing you can't in a little rowing boat that will do. When I'm rowing at full speed with no wind and no current, I'm only getting 1.5, 2 knots out of it. So it's not a performance machine by any stretch. So you are at the mercy of the wind and the currents. So you just kind of have to accept it, and Somalia wouldn't have been ideal, but it wouldn't have been the end of the world.
Right.
There was a rower who went there the year before, and in fact he got in touch with us. He was in touch with Neil and saying, "Don't let him go to Somalia. It's an awful place." He had a really tough time there, but he survived. So it wasn't a preferred destination.
Yeah.
But it would have. We would have made it work.
Yeah, and Tango, where you ended up, how far north was that of the original, destination that you were planning to land at?
I think it's about 150 miles, something like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Some questions that people in the gym had as well were, did he have to sort of visa out before he left? Did he just sort of tell the ports, "Hey, I'm rowing there and I'll sort it out when I get there"? Like, how does that work? Sort of the logistics and the paperwork behind it.
Yeah, actually, I called the embassy. So the embassy for Australia is actually in Japan for Tanzania.
All right.
So I got in touch with the embassy in Japan, and they told me that if I was flying in, I would need a visa, but if you arrive by boat, they'll do visa on arrival.
Oh,
so nice and easy.
Excellent. So you just had to take your passport with you, and
yeah. And in fact, they came down. They had someone monitoring the port, so they saw me coming in, and they were also notified by the yacht club as well. But they had somebody down at the water's edge to meet me as I arrived.
Yeah.
Paperwork's not quite that efficient that they can stamp your passport there and then, so they can basically they kind of sign you in, but you then have to. Bit of a process. You have to then go into the town, pay your fee, and get your passport stamped at that point.
Right.
After you've paid, but there's it's a bit of a process.
Yeah.
Bureaucratic, but anyway.
What was it like jumping off the side of the boat and touching solid ground after 3 months at sea?
It was fantastic, but I was surprised myself in that I couldn't stand up. I hit the ground and it was weird. It was like it was a drunk feeling.
Yeah, I didn't have that one on the slideshow, but I will superimpose because I had that video right now as you're talking about it. Yeah, when you jump off, you're sort of stumbling around and your legs couldn't hold you there.
No, that's right. Yeah, and then just walking up the beach afterwards, it was like wandering from side to side, like a drunken sailor.
How long did it take to get like land legs back, I guess?
So that first day, night, I mean, literally, I was, very wobbly on my feet. And then the next, it took about, each time I stood up and each time I woke up, then I was mentally still at sea. I sort of still had that, was wobbly. But once I'd walked a couple of paces, I was okay again.
Nice.
But it's weird.
Yeah, strange feeling.
Yeah, very.
All right. So I think that's basically everything that I had dotted down that I wanted to talk about. Is there anything that you want to talk about? Anything that I've missed that you experienced that you want to share about this journey?
I suppose just sort of getting towards the end, there was a couple of hiccups at the end because I got to had a cracking row down alongside Zanzibar, sort of really strong current down. So this was after I'd missed Dar es Salaam, so I had to recognise I was going to have to go the other side of Zanzibar, and then got to the northern tip of Zanzibar, and the wind completely died, and I was in the shelter of Zanzibar, if you like, so minimal current, and then started rowing across about a 25-mile stretch from Zanzibar to Tanzania. Started rowing across that stretch of water, and the wind turned, and to a westerly, so it was blowing me offshore. The current, but I then having gone through slack current on the northern tip of Zanzibar, then moved into another current that runs between Zanzibar and Tanzania, that was taking me north again. So current taking me the wrong way, wind blowing me offshore, and it was at that point I was probably most concerned, because it was within sight of arriving, basically within sight of sort of the end of this voyage, and suddenly I couldn't go there. So I had to turn around, head back to Zanzibar. Just north of Zanzibar, there are shoals, so I went to those shoals, anchored up on those shoals, and spent 24 hours there waiting for the wind to change.
Yeah,
but that was a little worrying. That close to the finish line to suddenly get the wrong wind.
Right.
But it all came good in the end.
Yeah, managed to get that final home stretch locked in.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so now that this sort of quest has been accomplished, finished, what's next? What's on the cards?
Well, so I've been trawling the internet looking for sort of ideas of what I'd quite like to do. So I'd really like to redo that row in a sailing boat. But I'm thinking that before I do it in a sailing boat, that I'd also like to do a round Australia in a sailing boat. And I've done a bit of research on this, and it looks like the speed record for round Oz is 42 days. And I'd like to have a crack at beating that record.
All right.
Yeah.
So 42 days, that's, starting at one point, going all the way around Australia back to that starting point.
That's right.
All right.
Yep.
And where did that one take place? So, where do they start?
I think the last one started either in Brisbane or Sydney. There have been a couple. I think there might be 2 records that stand at the moment for 2 different types of boats. And I think one was in Sydney and one was Brisbane.
Okay. And would you be trying to get on one of those boats to break that record, or do your own style? Or?
So I'm looking at the Mini Transat 650, which is a 6.5 metre boat, very small boat. So they do a foiling version of it. It might be a bit small, so I need to do a bit more research and find the right boat, and then find the right sponsor.
Right.
So yeah, if you're looking for a sponsorship opportunity,
there we go. And would this be for the same cause, a Zero to Hero?
Yeah.
So just keep it going, but in a different fashion.
Yep.
Fantastic.
Yep.
Well, that's very exciting. I'm looking forward to hearing how this progresses.
Great.
And what the future holds there.
Yep.
Great. Well, look, Rob, thanks so much for coming back in. I really appreciate it. And I just think the whole thing is super interesting. And I think it's great that you got there and the first person to do it in this fashion.
Yep.
And for a great cause. And like I said, I will post that link. In all the descriptions. So if you want to, or if you can, please feel free to get in there and throw some donations towards a great cause. But Rob, thank you one more time. I think that was really a fantastic thing that you've accomplished.
Thank you very much.
Awesome.
Cheers,
Actually, I'm going to take you outside. You've already got a frame on our wall of accolades now.
Oh, great.
Yeah, which is great.
I'll have to come and have a look.
100%. Anyway, Rob, thanks very much, mate.
You. Great.
Have a good one.
Thanks a lot.
Bye.